Welcome back to Tightwad Workshop. Today we're going to be using this ruin of a chair to learn about the basics of wooden furniture restoration. I found this one dumped on the side of the road about a year ago, and it looked like it had already been there for a year at that point. Now, depending on where you live in the world, you might call this style of chair a Windsor chair, or maybe a farmhouse chair, or a rustic chair. Whatever name you give it, this particular one's going to be great for our purposes, because even if we fail at the restoration, it hasn't cost us any money. Now, the first step is going to be dismantling it, so let's get started on that now. We'll be fixing the seat first, so I'll just pack away the other parts for now. The seat was originally made from 5 pieces of wood, and one of them is missing. The pieces have these machine-cut joints along each edge. These still fit together nicely, but I don't have the tools to make these edges on our new seat piece. So we'll need to plane this edge flat, then join it with dowels instead. I'll start by making some pencil marks on the edge we need to flatten. That way I won't make a mistake and plane off the wrong edge of the board. Now I'll use a couple of bench dogs to set up the workbench for planing. Next I'll place our board in position and secure it with a pair of holdfasts. I'll use our 5-minute mallet to tap those holdfasts into position. Now we can start planing off the machined edge from our board. Just use nice steady strokes. This wood is soft pine, so it won't take long. This line marks the deepest part of the machined edge, so I'll stop here. These baseboards are rounded on the bottom, so I'll use the centre of the board as a reference point for the combination square. I don't know if the chair was made this way intentionally or if the boards are warped, but I guess we'll find out. Now we need to find out how far apart these two holes need to be. We can do that by measuring the matching holes on the chair's back piece. I'll measure between the outside edges of the holes, and that looks pretty close to 167mm. So now we just need to move the seat pieces apart until they also show 167mm. Then we need to hold those seat pieces steady on the workbench and measure the gap between them. In this case, 115mm. We'll also need to know how long to cut our replacement seat board. I'm going to use this piece of structural timber for the replacement. It's not ideal furniture wood, but then again, this isn't a precious piece of fine furniture. Once we've marked it to length and squared off the end, we can take it to the saw stool and cut it. We'll need to plane this rounded corner off the edge of the board, so I'll set this marking gauge to 5mm, then mark a line down each side at this edge. Next I'll mark our desired board width of 115mm, then I'll use that mark to reset the marking gauge and mark the guidelines down the other side of the board. Now we can take the board back to our saw stool and use a rip saw to saw off most of the waste edge. I don't really want this knot showing on the top side of the chair seat, so we'll mark this side of the board as the bottom. Now we can plane the edges of our replacement board down to our guidelines. Use your square regularly to make sure you're keeping the top surface flat and square. Then we'll turn the board over and plane the other edge in the same way. This is the edge that we marked first, which needs to have 5mm removed to remove the original rounded corners on the board. Once we've planed to the lines, we can check the fit against its matching chair seat board. I can't see any light through that gap, so I think it'll be okay. Now we can place our new board bottom side down on the bench and position the original seat boards next to it. Then we can mark the seat profile along its edge. It'll be much easier to rough out this profile before we glue the seat together, so I'll mark a series of lines across the board like this. Then saw each one down to slightly above the profile lines, using a tenon saw. Then we can use a chisel to remove the bulk of the waste wood. When we get close to the profile lines, we can skim close to them in a single pass with the chisel, like this. Once the roughing out is finished, we can clear off the workbench. Now we can mark some lines for the dowel locations. I'm going to use these nails to mark the 4 dowel locations on each of the boards. Then I'll cut the nail heads off with pliers. Now we need to accurately align and position the pairs of boards, then tap the boards together with a hammer. This will leave these marks on our new board, showing where to drill the dowel holes. Now we can remove the nails and drill those dowel holes. Once all the dowels have been drilled and tested with a dry fit, it's time to glue the seat together. I'll use my 2 favourite sash clamps for this job. Use plenty of glue on the joints and spread it around with your finger. Then fit all the sections of the seat together and place it in the clamps. I'm going to use these pieces of scrap wood as packing to avoid damaging the edges of the seat. Now we can tighten our clamps until all the joints close up. The middle of the seat is bulging up slightly, so I'll weigh it down with these 2 blocks of cast iron. Now we can wipe off the excess glue with a damp cloth and wait for it to dry. While we wait for the seat glue to cure, we can move on to sanding the chair's frame components. So there are 2 basic kinds of woodworkers in the world. There are the ones that tell you that they hate sanding, and then there are liars. We'll start by splitting this sheet of 80 grit sandpaper into quarters. Then we'll use the coarse 80 grit sandpaper to remove the last of the old varnish from the chair parts. Just use nice smooth strokes with your sanding block and rotate the leg as you finish each sector. If your sandpaper gets clogged up, you can clean it a little bit like this. Wipe the remaining dust off with a dry cloth to see how you're doing. That's close, but we still have a few thin lines of old varnish there to remove. The concave areas are easier to sand if we wrap our paper around a piece of dowel. This 10mm dowel works well for this particular radius, and you can use bigger or smaller dowels for the other areas of the leg. These sharp features are best sanded by folding the sandpaper in half and then working it around the slot. I'm not going to torture you by making you watch me sand all of the frame parts, so I'll finish these off camera and come back when I've finished. Seriously, if you feel like time is passing a lot faster than it used to, just pick up a sanding block. It'll slow right back down again. Let's pack the frame parts away again and get back to the seat. I've kept the seat in the clamps for a couple of days to let the glue cure. The bottom of the seat is definitely not flat, and we have this area where I made a mistake and the boards are misaligned. But we can hide that error with a little bit of planing. Now we can turn the seat over and work on the top. We can use the plane to smooth and finish this area down, and the plane will also work for smoothing this part of the seat. But this concave section is an area that the plane blade just can't reach. So we'll need to use a gouge chisel to finish this part. This chisel is quite rusty, so I'll give it a quick clean and sharpen first. If we were working in hardwood, we'd need to do all of this hollowing out work with a mallet. But luckily for us, this wood is soft and the chisel is sharp, so we can just push the chisel by hand, which is much faster. I do need to be careful here, or I might cut the concave a bit too deep. Once we're happy with the gouge chisel work, we can switch to some extra coarse 40 grit sandpaper to flatten off the peaks from our excavation. Then we can switch to 80 grit sandpaper to smooth the surface and remove any remaining varnish from the seat. Unfortunately, I did dig a little too deep in a few spots here, but we can claim that they're character marks, or we can just cover them up with a cushion. Now we can mark the finished edge of our new board and saw it off with a handsaw. Next we need to fix this mortise hole. It split apart while we were disassembling the chair, so I'll lever it apart with a small chisel and work some glue into the gap. I'll use my finger to squish the glue deeper into the crack there. Now we can pull the seat over to the edge of the bench and use a clamp to squeeze the cracked part back together. I'll put the clamp jaw inside this plastic bag so that it doesn't get glued to the joint. Sorry about that bad camera angle. I promise I'll give you a better view of it tomorrow. There we go. I even got it in focus this time. We'll need to remove the spilled glue next, so it's back to sanding once again. Not such a big job this time though. Now we can start gluing the chair back together. This needs to happen in a particular sequence. Start with a leg, then install a side brace, then its partner leg, then the cross brace and a leg on the other side. Now we need to make sure we fit the other side brace to its leg and the cross brace. Now fit the side brace into the last chair leg and the underside is done. The spilled glue is much easier to clean up with a damp cloth while it's still wet. Now we can turn the chair over and start on the top side. On this chair, the arms need to be fitted before the back. I'll fit the spindles into the arm first. Then fit the arm onto the chair seat. Sometimes you need to twist and jiggle the spindles a bit to make them fit. The other arm's fitted in the same way. I needed to tap these spindles into their holes, so I'm using my cork sanding block to avoid damaging the chair back. Now we'll use a clamp to pull the arms and back into alignment. Then refit the screws that connect them together. One final wet cloth cleanup and we can leave the glue to cure. Okay, so we're definitely on the home stretch now, especially if you remember what this chair looked like when we started. Our next step is going to be to apply some wood stain. Now, these are samples of all the wood stains I've got available here in the workshop. I'm planning to start with an all-over coat of dusty oak, and then if I need to make our new centreboard a little bit darker to match the colour of the rest of the chair, I'll try some of this walnut on that and just gradually blend it in. Let's get started and see how it works out. So as you've seen, a lot of these kind of woodworking projects end up stretching over multiple days because we've got to have time to wait while the glue or the stain dries. Now when it comes to finishing a woodworking project, I usually use an oil-based varnish like this one. These work great, but their downside is that this time of year it takes about 8 hours to dry in between coats. Now on my last trip to the hardware store I found this water-based varnish, and if it behaves the way it claims on the tin, then I should be able to apply my 3 coats of finish in a single day and get this job done. Now just in case you think that this is a sponsored deal, I did pay full price for this. I'm interested to see how it performs because if it does work well, that's good news for all of us. And I really do hope you like our montage music because you're about to hear it again. Well, I gotta say, that's worked out a lot better than I thought it would. Nah, even I couldn't do that to you 4 times. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Tightwad Workshop is filmed in front of a live studio audience. About 8 hours to dry in between coats. I had this around the wrong way the whole time.